On to Rob MacDonald. Rob is the Agronomic Excellence Manager for BASF Canada. His areas of expertise include canola agronomy and plant competition studies. Here's Rob.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. When we're talking about making every plant count and maximizing canola plant stand, I think it's super important that we talk about, well, what exactly are we targeting? Maximizing a canola plant stand does not mean getting as many plants in the field as possible. There was a time when a grower was just thrilled when this canola was, we used to say, thicker than the hair on a dog's back. Well, that's just not the case anymore. What our research has shown and experience is that we can target a specific population for hybrid canola in particular to maximize performance and consistency to get the most out of the genetics that are on the market today. Next slide, please. The common thought in the past was that because canola is so plastic, it didn't really matter what type of plant stand you ended up with. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the more plants, the better. Well, in fact, there is a more ideal plant structure for the field. And as I said, canola is quite plastic in its response to population. So I've got these three pictures up here showing how canola responds to different plant stand. On the left side, we've got very low plant population, and you can see multiple stems, as many as 5 stems, maybe more, coming off a single plant. You can see that the flowering is later on that, so it's impacting the maturity of the plant. And then over on the right side of the screen, we see the impact of a high plant population, and that's where we get into these single stem canola plants. And it can actually push maturity, but also create a lot of stress on the plant. Where what I like to see in an ideal canola plant population is 2-3 stems per plant. So you get a main raceme supported by very strong secondary stems. Next slide, please. Chris was talking a little bit earlier too about what ideal populations would look like and how having too heavy a population can actually lead to a situation where you have thin stems and high mortality in the population. There isn't a whole lot of point of putting seeds into the ground that you fully expect are going to die because of mortality. You can see the picture on the lower half of the screen where you see these very small spindly stems that are, there's two things to note here. One, they're very, very slight plants with very thin stems, not robust. And second, very importantly, they're below the canopy of the plants. So these plants aren't going to make a pretty high mortality from this high plant population. Where we see an ideal plant population shown above, a more ideal plant population is shown above, where out of that group of plants taken out of that same 1 foot of row, we've got basically one plant that's below the canopy. So one plant that may not survive. In fact, all those plants may survive. Next slide. But the other end of the spectrum, while we can have too high a plant population leading to significant mortality, we can go with extremely low plant populations, and they can be successful in certain years. But there's certain downsides to having a very low population. As I mentioned, multiple stems, and the consequence of that is extended maturity. So if you're in an area that's prone to frost risk, as an example, this can really be a significant risk factor to your production season. So having too low a plant population can produce a strong stand, plasticity of the crop. But the downside is you can really drag out the maturity. Another aspect makes timing of fungicides more challenging because you can have a very extended floral window. Next slide, please. Another challenge with targeting, again, too low a plant population creates real challenges with weed control. Just relying on the extensive growth of lateral stems to get ground cover can lead to weed escapes. And with the challenges we have today with resistant populations, we need all the help we can get for managing weed populations. And canola at a correct target stand is a very strong competitor and can really be a contributor to effective weed control. Next slide, please. I mentioned this already, but it's visualized quite nicely in this slide here. We've got a couple InVigor products sown at different seeding rates, anywhere from 25 seeds per meter squared right up to 141 seeds per meter squared. And you can see as you go from left to right, in particular on the 258 HPC on the left side, how as we go up in seeding rate, we accelerate the maturity of the crop. And in particular, it highlights that these, relatively low seeding rates, 25 seeds per meter squared, 47 seeds per meter squared, where we really draw out the maturity. And I already talked about the risks about having a crop that's impacted by, I'd say, an early late season frost. Next slide, please. Another impact, and we particularly saw it in this past season with the very hot, dry conditions we experienced in much of the prairies, is that we can see an impact of having too high a population on the ability to handle drought. And where we have very high stem counts, very thin plants, not very well developed root systems, much more susceptible to drought stress. Next slide, please. So what has the research shown to date? Well, the research has shown very clearly to date that growers in Western Canada should be targeting somewhere between 5 to 7 plants per square foot. This really represents an optimum population, and a range is an appropriate way to target a population. You're not necessarily trying to target 4.5 or 5.5, but anywhere between 5 to 7 plants is a good target for establishing a strong canola plant stand. Now, recognize it's going to take more than 5 to 7 seeds to establish that plant stand. Currently, we see in our trials across Western Canada approximately 65% establishment rate. So it takes about 10 seeds per square foot to achieve this target population on average. And that's where we see all the benefits I talked about earlier in terms of acceptable maturity, good standability. And the other aspect is, this is where we see, as evidenced by this simple graph here, our best yield response as well. Next slide, please. Our findings from our own research are well supported by research in peer-reviewed articles. This particular meta-analysis put together by Murray Hartman a couple of years ago, and it really highlighted that plant densities above roughly 40 plants per meter squared produce 90% of the yield. And you see between 90 and 95% is basically 40 to 70 plants per meter squared, which is very close to this 5 to 7 plants per square foot that we advocate as a ideal target plant population. So we've got very good agreement with data from our own trials and with the data that's been published in peer-reviewed articles over the years. Next slide, please. So there you have it. 5 to 7 plants can really maximize your yield results and get you consistent performance out of hybrid canola, InVigor hybrid canola. As far as maximizing your plant stand, happy to answer questions during the Q&A session, but I think it's really important. I wanted to highlight the importance of know what you're after, count your stand, understand what your emergence is, and then target your seeding rate based on that experience. Thanks for that.